First of all, thank you and Ranking Member Wyden for holding this hearing. It's a really important matter, and I appreciate what you said at the outset and Senator Wyden said at the outset, and I agree with you. WTO is incredibly important, but it's also broken, and we need to put these reforms through, and we need to do everything we can here in the Congress to try to come together with a consensus on this, because it's going to be challenging. To our witnesses, I appreciate your expertise. Ms. Kirk, I was glad to see your cautious optimism that the new text circulating could possibly be successful on fishing subsidies. As Senator Wyden said, I worked on this 15 years ago as USTR for President George W. Bush, and we thought we were close then. So it's an important issue for us. It's also an important issue for the oceans, and I was glad to hear that, and we need to push as hard as we can to help you with that. I'm also pleased that we seem to be focusing on WTO reform today, Mr. Chairman, as we have successfully completed USMCA and China Phase 1. It's time to turn to this multilateral issue that we face. And people are watching. I think the world is really watching what we're doing here in the United States Senate in particular. The desire for reform, I think, cuts across party lines. I heard it this morning from both parties. I think it cuts across branches of government. I know the executive branch has concerns, as has been discussed. I sat right here before you, Mr. Chairman, and Senator Wyden, by the way, who was on the committee at that time, in 2006, and I criticized the WTO overreach by the appellate body on anti-dumping rules and on zeroing. So this is a longstanding concern that administrations have had, as you've indicated, through various parties. I see three major related yet distinct problems with the WTO. One is, we've talked about today, the judicial activism by the appellate body. I think it's weakened the multilateral system. Second, clearly the WTO has been unable to negotiate these new agreements. And I worked hard on the Doha agreement. With people even forget it, there was a Doha agreement. Those negotiations have stalled. And then third, both of these problems have made the WTO ineffective at addressing the challenge that China's non-market, I would say techno-nationalism, has posed to the multilateral system. I think China, as was said earlier, is a huge issue that has to be addressed as part of these reforms. Mr. Graham, I turn to you first. Can you briefly explain how judicial activism by the appellate body has prevented members from addressing the issues we're seeing right now with regard to China?
Thank you for that, Senator Portman. I appreciate that opportunity. And in fact, had you not asked the question, I would possibly have wanted to intervene on that point. Judicial activism, particularly in terms of filling gaps, as we all know, gaps or ambiguities exist in agreements because the parties couldn't agree often, and they agreed not to agree on them. When the court the appellate body fills those gaps, it makes negotiations more difficult in the future because negotiators worry about how will those silences be filled, and so they don't want to leave them. They have to cross every T and dot every I, and they're uncertain or worried about how they'll be negotiated in the future. So there is an interaction between judicial activism and difficulty of reaching agreements.
Thank you. I think we can't look at these appellate body issues in isolation. In a way, it's the canary in the coal mine for the multilateral system. And I appreciate your work on that. I want to follow up with you after this hearing. Senator Wyden and Senator Grassley both talked about the need for reform, and it could be bipartisan. The chairman noted that Senator Cardin and I have recently reduced a resolution. It expresses support for the multilateral system and the need for a WTO, but also proposes some specific reforms, such as exploring plurilateral agreements without MFN, which I think is helpful with regard to China, restoring the ability of members to use safeguards and trade remedies, and other changes basically to bring the WTO into the 21st century and strengthen the ability of WTO members to respond to China's non-market practices. The purpose of this resolution we've introduced, I think, is really threefold. First, we want to get more specific about the concerns at WTO and put those out there. Second, we want to propose solutions so that the world sees that, we're not just complaining, we have some specific solutions. And third, we want to make clear that we see the rebalancing of the WTO in favor of negotiating as the primary guide when considering the value of various ideas on WTO reform. We've worked with Chairman Grassley on this proposal. We've also worked with Ranking Member Wyden, and we also worked with USTR, and we've appreciated the input from all of them, and we are certainly open to other ideas. So I would ask today, Mr. Chairman, that we hold a hearing on this. That's important, but also that we consider a markup in this next opportunity we have, which will probably be September now in the fall. And I'd like to be able to mark up a resolution in the fall. Again, Cardin and I have one. Others may have other ideas. I believe it could receive overwhelming bipartisan support if done properly, and I think it could send a very strong signal in terms of the need for WTO reform and then specific ideas as to how to do it.
I'll be